Well, hey, Zach Martin appears to be out for the year, and we will talk about greatness tonight. What is up, everyone, and welcome into A to Z Sports Dallas Prime Time. I am your host, Mauricio Rodriguez, streaming with you live every Sunday and Thursday night at 8 p.m. Central, and catching up with you with quick hitting videos Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. I'm on a new studio tonight. Recently moved, so I'm sorry about not having a show on Wednesday. That's what was behind it. You cannot really tell the difference from the studio, maybe other than the fact that the microphone is on this side of the frame and not on the other side. But I'm getting used to it, so sorry if there's any sort of technical issues. I hope not. Set up in a very, very improvised manner, but hopefully we'll have a fun time tonight and talk some Cowboys football. Wanted to get into Cowboys versus Bengals a little bit today, but then we were hit with the Zack Martin news. He is out for the year with the same ankle that's been bothering him since training camp. And I'll be honest with you, the part that hurts the most is that he was expected to return. That's what Cowboys head coach Mike McCarthy said. Mike McCarthy went into detail about it later in the day. And the reasoning from the Cowboys was he'll rehab, he'll miss a couple of games, which he did, and he'll be ready to go Monday night versus the Cincinnati Bengals. And Zack Martin described it as a situation where he was going through the same rehab processes that he already had in the past and that had worked for him. Only this time, they didn't work. And he practiced Monday, Tuesday, or he had some action Monday and Tuesday. Things were going in the other direction that the Cowboys wanted it to go, and Zack Martin wanted it to go. And they got to the conclusion that, hey, let's call it quits for the year. And now Cowboys fans are wondering if it's for his career as well. The part that really gets me thinking is the fact that these rehabs are things that he had already done, that had already worked for him. And when Zack Martin is talking about that, I don't know if I read too much into it, but it kind of felt like him making it official that, hey, things are different now, right? 34 years old, 11 years into his playing career. This really might be it for Zack Martin. Now, if he wants to return, there are easy ways to make that happen, even with his current deal, where they can exercise an option and make it work. And then if he's on the roster by one day in the calendar year, then he'll have a deal for 2025. So they can make it work. But then it also gets into the conversation, and it's a very tough, cold conversation of, do the Cowboys want to make it work? Which inevitably leads us to the question of, does Zack Martin want to play for another team even? And I say that because clearly we've been on a downward slope since last year. Pains us to say it. Yes, Zack Martin is awesome. It's a big testament to the kind of player that he is, that last year, when he won a first-team All-Pro, we still felt a level of decline, right? And even that got him first-team All-Pro. That speaks volumes about who he is as a player. He was so far above the rest of the players at his position that even though he started to fall off a little bit in 2023, still made first-team All-Pro. But now in 2024, it's been a little bit different, right? He's dealing with multiple injuries, and we have not seen the consistency. And consistency is the word to describe Zack Martin as a player. Now, obviously, you're getting to this kind of speculation game of, well, if he was healthy, how would he look? And the bad news is that it's impossible to know for sure. But we know the facts, right? We know that Martin admitted to contemplating retirement. We know it's not official, right? I know Cowboys Nation acts like it's almost a guarantee that he will retire, but I think that's just because some people know what he was thinking before the season. So the decision has not been made. We know from Zack Martin himself that he will think of it. We know that he doesn't want to talk about it just now. And one of the things that really caught my attention was that once the rehab is done, he'll know, or he might have an easier decision to make, is the words that he used. And that's where we're at right now. And we're going to talk about Zack Martin's greatness. Obviously, it's tough to lose a player like that, and it's particularly tougher when this might be it for someone who is an absolute legend for the Cowboys, and I'll say it, for the NFL, because we're talking about a guy that I truly believe is one of the best NFL players of the generation. Absolutely. He might have done it at a not particularly sexy position, right? He wasn't on everyone's Sports Center top 10 every night, but he played the position like one of the best players ever. And for now, he'll have 11 years in the NFL. And we know after the surgery, after rehab, after all of that, we'll get into the conversation of, or we might wait for his words on what he will decide to do after the season. But for now, I want to talk about his greatness in this particular way. I've got 4 stats for you that some of you might already know some of this. But number 1, and this is the most obvious one, but Zack Martin played 11 years in the NFL. 7 of those years, he had first team All-Pro honors. 7 of 11 years. 2 more years, so 2 years other than those, he had second team All-Pro honors. 9 Pro Bowls and 9 years with All-Pro honors, either a first team or second team caliber. That is absolutely insane to think about, but here's my favorite part. That makes 2 seasons where he has not received All-Pro honors, and I'm including 2024 there because he won't get All-Pro this year. He just won't, right? Wasn't playing great. He was playing injured, and now he'll miss a good chunk of the season. So Zack Martin is not being named an All-Pro this year. He might have been named Walter Payton Man of the Year, though, which is also another conversation to be had. But that makes 9 out of 11 years where he did not get All-Pro honors. Those 2 years are years that he didn't play the full season. So you can perfectly make the argument, based on what we know, that if injuries were not an issue for Zack Martin in his NFL career, he would have had 11 years in the NFL with 11 All-Pro honors, either a first team or second team. That is insane dominance to talk about. That is Aaron Donald type stuff. That is greatest of all time type stuff. And that's awesome, man, for Zack Martin. Hopefully we get to see a little bit more, but it's looking like there's a strong chance we won't, right? You hear reporters like Ian Rappaport, Clarence Hill, kind of very heavily suggest that this is it for Zack Martin. And I know no one has put it out there officially. I know Martin talked to reporters and refused to make it official, but I think everyone is leaning towards Zack Martin hanging it up. We will see what his decision-making process looks like in 2025, however. So that's the number 1 stat that I think is just absolutely insane from Zack Martin. But let me say hi before I get to number 2 in the chat. We've got Katharina in the room. We've got Cam as well. We've got Gregory. Shout out to you, sir. We've got Mark, Aaron, Thurell over on the Facebook side of things. Gregory as well, inviting everyone to smash the like button if you haven't already. Appreciate you, Gregory. I've also got Joey Bella around there. And Cam says, I feel bad for him. Man, you gotta feel bad, right? Like, I'm telling you, when Zack Martin said, and I have the exact quote here for those of you who didn't catch it, but when he's talking about his rehab process, and he's kind of like admitting that, oh, okay, so this was different from the past, where I just had some processes that worked for me and everything was fine. He had this quote that man, I really felt. He said, it's something that I've been dealing with all year, going back to training camp, and really over the last few years. Over the last couple of weeks, we took some time to try to heal up, doing different treatments and approaches. On Monday, did some workouts on the field, but it just didn't respond well. Britt Brown, who is the Cowboys director of rehabilitation, and I had a heart-to-heart conversation, and we decided it was smart to get this thing fixed and focus on getting healthy. Okay, but here's the part that I was talking about. He said, I've done that throughout my career, trying different treatments that have worked for me in the past, but after not getting the kind of response I was looking for over the last couple of weeks, it became clear. Not being able to perform at my best or be who I am on the field is a big part of why we decided to take this step. And yeah, man, you feel for him. you feel for him because he is such a legend, like we've already established. And this might be how he goes out, right? And we always say that Father Time is undefeated in sports, and particularly in football. And with Zack Martin, he's one of those guys that you think he might beat Father Time, even though we know time and time again that Father Time waits for no man. Zack Martin is one of those guys that gave you hope that, hey, Father Time might take an L on this one. But yeah, this is where we're at. Now, another stat from Zack Martin that really lets us know just how absolutely awesome he is. And this is the one that a lot of people know. A lot of people know this one. But according to Pro Football Reference, Zack Martin was called for 7 career holdings, or has been called for 7 career holdings, right? Because we got to leave that door open. As long as Zack Martin leaves it open, I'm not going to retire Zack Martin. He can do that himself. So we got to use that asterisk there. Has been, right? 7 career holdings. Compare that to 7 All-Pro years. And that is just the definition of consistency, right? You want to make it about false start? He's got 8 false starts. He basically has a 2-to-1 ratio for career penalties to All-Pro years. That's how insanely good Zack Martin has been in his career. I know a lot of people already knew that one because you see it tweeted out every random Tuesday because that's how good Zack Martin is. But as number 3 on my list, I've got some trivia for you on Odell Beckham Jr.'s rookie season, which just so happens to be Zack Martin's rookie season. And I'll just give some context before to really establish how crazy this is. 2014 NFL draft. All right. 2014 NFL draft. And I already see Troy Dudley here say at pick number 16, right? Cowboys had the 16th overall pick. Now, at the time, I was 14 years old when the 2014 NFL draft took place. Naturally, I wasn't the most educated of fans, right? I was just a teenager having fun with the Cowboys and loving them unconditionally and wondering if the Cowboys should pick Johnny Manziel, because I love Johnny Manziel at Texas A&M. He's one of my favorite college football players of all time. He was fun to watch. I know that everything of the off the field stuff was a problem. When I was 14 years old, man, my relationship with Johnny Manziel was limited to watching him play football on Saturdays. So naturally, I liked the guy. And I liked Romo as well. It wasn't anything anti-Tony Romo. It wasn't anything like that. It was just maybe it's time for the future, right? And Bruce says Johnny football hype was very real. To this day, I say that when Roger Goodell walked up to that podium to announce the Cowboys draft pick, I still believe to this day that he absolutely thought it was going to be Johnny Manziel. I think you can see it on his face when you go watch that clip, and fans are just wild for the whole thing. I still think to this day Roger Goodell thought he was going to read Johnny Manziel's name. But man, before I move on, let me go back to the 2014 NFL draft. You had Blake Bortles, quarterback, picked number 3 overall. Sammy Watkins, picked number 4 to Buffalo. A lot of these players did not pan out. We know that now. But at the time, they were awesome rookies headed to the NFL. Mike Evans, wide receiver, 7th overall. You had Eric Ebron, tight end, going to the Lions, 10th overall. OBJ, 12th overall, right? You had, who else do we have? You had Brandon Cooks. Oh my God, you had Brandon Cooks, the 20th overall. Who else? Johnny Manziel, 22nd. I'm talking about offensive players here just to really establish this. Teddy Bridgewater, 32nd overall. And OBJ goes crazy. We know about this, right? He led the NFL in average yards per game with 108.8. This guy was catching 109 yards on a game-to-game basis. Had 95 catches, 1,300 total yards, 12 touchdowns. He missed 4 games, by the way. So, and still finished top 10 in all those categories that I just talked about. Had he not missed those games, he probably would have led the NFL in all of those stats. But anyways, this is all to get to the trivia part of it, which is OBJ won Offensive Rookie of the Year that year. Out of 50 votes, he had 42. So it was kind of a dominant win, kind of a solid win. You know who got 7 votes? You know who was the runner up for that Offensive Rookie of the Year award? It wasn't any skilled position player or quarterback, and there were 3 of them selected in the first round. Derek Carr was selected as well, right? Like in the second round, I think. Yeah, 36th overall. So you had a lot of QBs starting. You had a lot of QBs playing. Zack Martin was the runner-up. Mike Evans was third with 1 vote. Zack Martin didn't even have a stat line other than perhaps a very limited list of penalties that he had, right? That's an awesome stat. That's an awesome trivia bit that I wanted to share with you because I was looking at the awards voting. I was actually looking at Zack Martin's PFR page and I saw Offensive Rookie of the Year second in voting. And I was like, wonder what that looks like. I didn't expect him to have 7 votes for that one. That's awesome. An offensive guard just hauling in 7 votes because that's how good he was. He was a guard catching people's attention. That's awesome. Versus the Johnny Football hype was very real. Man, it really was. I absolutely remember that day very vividly. Cam says 6th favorite guard, always ran behind him. Shout out to Weezy for being here. Troy says bad calls. Yeah, man, that draft is insane to me because when we got to it, there was a lot of hype around the entire draft class. Remember, like a lot of people thought, Jadavon Clowney was going to be a great defensive end. Khalil Mack, I know Khalil Mack had his moment. Absolutely, he did. But he had Greg Robinson in there, Jake Matthews. There's a lot of players whose careers just did not go as planned out of that draft class. Last but not least, on my 4 stats before we move on to some other stuff about Zack Martin is the fact that and this is a simple one to me, but I think sometimes we underestimate it, especially now that we're talking about Zack Martin dealing with so many injuries. But this guy played so many complete seasons. 4 out of his first 5 seasons in the league, he played complete seasons. The exception, he was at 14, right? So talking about a guy who rarely missed any games. Then he added another 3 full years after that. And I keep mentioning consistency. That's what you got out of Zack Martin, excuse me. And that's what we would have continued to get if injuries were not a thing in the NFL. Unfortunately, they are, and Father Time is as well. And now we wonder if Zack Martin is going to return at all or not to the gridiron. Hopefully he does, but we'll see. For now, Martin is going to be competing for Walter Payton Man of the Year at the NFL Honors, which is already an insane testament to him. But now we've talked about Zack Martin and his amazing, unbelievable career. And while I can talk about his old pros and we can talk about his film and we can talk about who he was as a player, there was one comment from Mike McCarthy that I really liked on today's press conference. Because you can talk all you want about how great he was on the film, on the stats, on all of that. But I think that Mike McCarthy gave him the perfect compliment today on today's press conference. Because he talked about the behind-the-scenes stuff, right? And I'll read you the full quote here, so bear with me. Mike McCarthy said, he is going to be missed. We are not going to replace Zack Martin. His presence, those meetings that we have offensively by position group, Zack is a veteran leader that leads one of the meetings. Those type of things behind closed doors. You're not going to replace that. He brings so much to the team culture. We all recognize how great of a player he has been here in Dallas for his whole career, but what he gives us as a person, people gravitate to him, and he does a really good job of bringing people together. That offensive line room is really an illustration of his leadership. He'll definitely be missed in that area. Oh, man, gotta love it, man. That quote right there about what he brings to the table and the fact that that offensive line is a testament to his leadership. Man, that hits different, right? Because that's when you start thinking about what we were talking about earlier in the week or last week about, hey, could Brock Hoffman maybe bench Zach Martin? And then you read this kind of stuff and you kind of realize Zach was never going to be a part of any of those conversations in Dallas because you cannot sit a guy like that. Not with his resume, not with the leadership that he brings to the table. He was never going to be in any situation like that. And it was a conversation to the point that we talked about it on prime time. Jerry Jones was asked about it. Mike McCarthy would have likely been asked about it as well if it weren't because of the injury news, right? Someone would have brought up the fact that, hey, Brock Hoffman is playing great. Zach Martin is injured. Is there anything there that you could think about maybe making a switch? That's a question that Mike McCarthy would have absolutely faced this week if it wasn't because of the season-ending injury news for Zach Martin. So that would have never happened just based on that quote alone. If Martin was in a position where he could play, he was never going to be set for Brock Hoffman. But speaking of Brock Hoffman, now we get into the conversation of what's next. Because that's the life in the NFL, right? There, time waits for no one. The Cowboys got to know what's the plan at right guard. Now, that goes for the following, 4 weeks, 5 weeks of the season, and it goes for 2025 and beyond. So I'll ask you something. If we're talking about 2025, who would you bet on? Would you bet on TJ Voss? Would you bet on Brock Hoffman? Or would you bet on option C, someone else, maybe through the NFL draft? Let me know in the chat. What do you think? While you give me your answers, however, I'll talk to you about what I am betting on and where I am betting on. And I'm talking about Texas Card House, where you can join the premier poker experience, where the thrill of the game meets the excitement of the community. And you know me, I've always said that where you like to play poker, man, you got to focus on the right community because you don't want to play with the wrong community. Texas Card House gives you the perfect blend of luxury, sophistication, and camaraderie for any poker aficionado. And that goes whether you are a seasoned pro or you are just starting out. And here's the absolute best part. Here's the pocket aces. If you mention A to Z Sports, you will get a free month of membership and 2 free hours to play poker at the Las Colinas venue or the Dallas venue. You can check out any of Texas Card House's 6 Texas locations. Make sure you also take advantage of $2 Tuesday. Texas Card House is where you should be playing poker at. That's where I know I'm playing poker at. And of course, mention A to Z Sports for that free month of membership. And shout out to them. Now, talking about the future, however, right? There's so many options for the long-term future. Forget about just 2024, right? Gregory says Hoffman. But Holly says, hey, you know what? I want BP at guard, which is a very fun discussion that this offseason, the offensive line talk, it's going to be crazy, especially with a new coaching staff in town, potentially, allegedly, right? Not even allegedly, but potentially. You all know that's a strong possibility since the entire coaching staff is on a 1-year deal. Cam says, better draft somebody is great. And obviously that would be the best case scenario. But that is going to be tough. I think, here's the thing. I think this. I know there's some very smart people like John Owning, right? And I trust John Owning so much. He's awesome at breaking down players' film. And he is perhaps, along Sky, along Bosch, right? Those three are the greatest at film, I would say, on Cowboys YouTube, right? Or some of the greatest. I know there's so many great content creators out there. Would hate to leave anyone out. But John Owning is awesome, starting from the fact that by 5 a.m. on a Monday, he will have a full report on every single player that touched the field that day on Twitter, right? That being said, he did say he thinks TJ Voss is a better player, right? And I would assume that makes sense based on what we've seen on tape. I think you can make the case that TJ Voss brings the most refinement at the position, if you will. But and I know, and everyone who's watched the Cowboys play recently knows, Brock Hoffman is nasty. right? He's one of those guys that in the trenches you want to have just because he sets the tone. He sets the physicality. He wants to be a bully on the field. And for a long time, Cowboys Nation has complained about not having a bully on the offensive line. That's what Brock Hoffman does. So that is his argument in this case. I think that's his calling card to be the next right guard of the Cowboys. I don't want to say the next Zack Martin because that would be disrespectful to Zack Martin. And that's not a knock on Brock. It's not a knock on anyone that we're going to talk about. That's how great Zack Martin was. But you also have TJ Voss. And TJ Voss, if he's the better player, he's the better player, you know? And that is going to be a fun position battle to watch in 2025 if it comes down to these two guys. Now, there's a possibility of saying, hey, Cooper Beebe's pretty damn good at what he does. But he was even better as a guard. And I understand that argument 100%. I kind of struggle with that part just because what we've seen from Cooper Beebe on film this year has already been so good to where I'm like, hey, do I want to go through the transition? Do I want to do the snip, snap thing with Cooper Beebe? This is the time to do it if you're going to do it. I'm not talking about week 14, middle of the season. I'm not talking about any of that. I'm talking about 2025. If you're going to change Cooper Beebe and where he plays, you doing it in year 2 seems like the smart move. Just ripping that Band-Aid off. But what are you basing that decision on? What are you basing that decision on? Are you basing it on, I want BB's best? Or are you basing it on, who am I getting in free agency? Or who am I getting in the NFL draft? Basically what the Cowboys did with Tyler Smith, right? Where they were like, we'll see what we get in the first round. And if it's a guard type player, Tyler will be kicked out outside. And if not, then he'll stay inside, which is what happened when the Cowboys picked Tyler Guyton. Ideally, I guess, you go by what you already know you have, in my view. And that is you have a great guard at left guard in Tyler Smith. And you've got a great player on Cooper. Not great. Maybe great might be too much too soon for Cooper Beebe. But you've got a promising player in Cooper Beebe. So I guess you got to go by, do you really think he will be better at guard than he will be at center? And if so, maybe you make that decision beforehand. But I don't want the Cowboys to sit on their, I don't want them to wait until April is what I don't want. If you're going to make the decision based on what you have, then fill those holes in free agency. Then sign what you're missing in free agency. Go get a center in free agency. But don't wait until the first round of the NFL draft. That's what I would not want. That's what I would hate to see from the Cowboys. But for now, it seems like they're going to move forward with Brock Hoffman. It's going to be made even more interesting because there might be another coaching staff entirely in 2025. So there will be a lot of offensive line talk in the offseason. I, for one, I'm excited about it. You might be looking for a center. You might be looking for a guard. You are probably going to be looking for a right tackle as well. And there's also going to be the conversation of, well, do I want to change Tyler Guyton from one side to another? And it's going to be offensive line drama in 2025. And I, for one, cannot wait. For now, though, if this is the last we've seen from Zack Martin, what else can we say? But, man, he is one of the best Cowboys players ever. And one of the best NFL players ever as well. Because you don't easily do what he did for those 11 years. Shout out Zack Martin. We'll see if this is the last we've seen from him. Kind of feels like it. And yeah, shout out to everyone in the chat. Shout out to all of you for supporting the show. This will be it for me tonight. And on Sunday night, we will see each other before the Cowboys play on Monday. And we'll talk about the Cowboys-Bengals game. There's a lot to be said about it. Have a good one, Cowboys Nation. And I'll see you. Man, what am I doing here? And I'll see you tomorrow. Shout out to Holly, man. I think we're all wondering this in the chat. Shout out all. Bye.